kind of blue for a minute. Hey, it's great to meet you. I love the book. Absolutely love
Thank,
the book.
thank you.
And
Thank you.
and so there's so many things that are going through my head with this. But what
Yeah.
I want to start off with here is what a brilliant way to begin this book by everything. The thing about Miles Davis is there's such a lore. There's such a mysterious shroud around the very known genius that we've all listened to.
Yeah.
So to actually get to that point where you meet him and the way you constructed it, where you really were a jazz journalist, you were like, oh shit, what am I doing? And you
Yeah.
go up and you meet this master and you know that he already has an edge to him.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then we go from there and you just unfold the story of all of these players. But I think the first thing that I want to know is what did you learn about this man that was surprising? What was the one thing as you went into this book that really began this journey of this book? What was it about it that said, I got to write this book?
Well, I think that I was blessed by God with this fluke that I happened to have gotten this assignment when I was a punk kid, a know-nothing punk kid. And somehow, between my brother and me, we faked my way into my getting an assignment from Vanity Fair to interview Miles Davis. You know, my brother telling the editor that I knew everything there was to know about jazz, when in fact at that time I think I owned maybe 3 jazz albums, and I just I gritted my teeth, I held my breath, I met the publicist, I went up in the elevator in the Essex House in Central Park South in Manhattan, and there suddenly there's Miles Davis, and uh, the thing so there have been so many surprises in doing the research for this book. The initial surprise for me was meeting Miles Davis, seeing this tiny little guy who at that point I think was maybe 62 years old. He looked older. He had on this giant wig of brown curls, and he was and no shirt, sort of Viet Cong pajama pants, spritzing his hair with his little spritzer, and I was terrified because, of course, Miles's reputation had preceded him as being the Prince of Darkness.
Yeah.
And there I am. I am the princelet of whiteness, and knowing nothing. And so the first big surprise to me was his generosity. This was a guy who's 62 years old. He's cut a lot of people out of his life. He went through life cutting out this person and that person, and at that point, what I really discovered after meeting with him a couple of times was that he was a lonely man. He wanted company. He wanted somebody to talk to. He wanted to tell somebody to tell his story to. And he was very kind to me in the end. The publicist told me I only had 1 hour. That was it. That's all I had. But at the end of the hour, I asked Miles if I could come back again tomorrow. He said, okay. And when I came back again tomorrow and blurted out all my dumb little questions about jazz and began to get the beginning of an understanding of what he was talking about. After another hour and a half or so, we began to really get some stuff. And then as I got into the research of this book, so many surprises about Miles. Jazz musicians are supposed to come from rough backgrounds. They grew up in the ghetto or something. Like Miles was upper middle class. Miles came from the Midwest. His father was a dentist, very prosperous guy. His grandparents owned a farm in Arkansas with horses. His father owned a farm in Illinois with horses. Miles rode horses. He was before he was the Prince of Darkness, he was the prince, and he was spoiled. But he was also a musical genius. He knew that from the jump, and he knew from the jump, after encountering Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker in St. Louis. He knew that's who he wanted to learn from. That's who he wanted to play with, and the only way to play with them and learn from them was to get to New York City, which in 1944, when Miles is 18, 19 years old, that is the world capital of jazz.
So how long did this research take? How long from the conception of this book to right now did this take?
Oh, God. I'll say 5 years, about
Okay.
5 years, all in. Yeah.
And I think the thing about this book that there's so many levels of it that is wonderful, especially for someone like me that loves jazz and knows these cats to a certain degree, is that this recording being one of the most popular recordings ever made is always timelessly endearing and loved, and the story continues on and on and on. So my question to you is, in 2024, why is it relevant for Kinda Blue to be revisited again?
Because it's a timeless album. It is the best-selling jazz album of all time, and arguably the best-loved jazz album of all time. And it is I just like what they used to call a broken record, Joe. I say over and over again, this is a timeless piece of work, and in listening to it and in enveloping yourself with it, you are wrapping yourself in timelessness. It has a quiet majesty that no other jazz album really has. It was recorded in March and April of 1959, but when you turn it on today and start listening to it, it's not March or April of 1959, and it's not March of 2024. It is just somewhere in another dimension, and this beautiful music covers you, it lifts you, it mystifies you, and it enthralls you and really lifts you up to a different place than where you were when you started listening to it. It's hard to describe exactly what it is, except that Miles was creating something brand new. He knew he's creating something brand new, and he was creating something that related in a way to the jazz that he had grown up with and that he had made before and that was in the air in the 1950s. But in a way, it was also something totally new, and it was a jazz that was built on much simpler building blocks than jazz had been built on before.
The one thing too is that all of these players, you do a wonderful job of weaving these tapestries of all these players and their histories and how they all came together. And my question to you is, of all of those people that were in that room that made this magical recording, was there one player that you feel like really stepped out and was the glue in there other than Miles? Or do you feel like it was a synergistic collective that made this what it was?
It was certainly synergistic collective, but Miles himself said, I built this album around the piano playing of Bill Evans.
Yeah.
In bringing Bill Evans into the group, Miles was doing something very controversial and very unpopular. He was bringing a white guy into the most successful small jazz group in the country in the late 1950s. And Bill Evans immediately began to get a lot of pushback, a lot of crap from black jazz musicians, from black audiences, just a lot of scorn and disbelief. Chick Corea, the great Chick Corea, who I got to interview, was fortunate enough to interview for this book, told me about being 17 years old and going with a pal to a club in Boston to hear Miles in I'm going to say around 1958, maybe a year before the recording of Kind of Blue. And Chick and his friend go in and they get a seat right down by the bandstand, which is on a riser, maybe 10 inches up. And he's looking up, and the band members begin to filter in, and Coltrane walks in, and there's Paul Chambers, and there's Jimmy Cobb, and then Miles walks in. Oh my God, it's Miles, and then this white guy with glasses comes in and sits down at the piano. Am I allowed to curse on this show?
Oh yeah.
Oh, good. And Korea said, I was so fucking disappointed. And within 10 minutes, 5 minutes of their beginning to play, he knew why that white guy with glasses was there. This was a guy who brought advanced knowledge of harmonies, of Western classical music. This was a guy who brought musical knowledge to jazz that hadn't been there before. There were so many great pianists in jazz, and you can reel them off, beginning with going all the way back to Jelly Roll Morton, and Art Tatum and Bud Powell and Thelonious Monk, but in Bill Evans there was, and his whiteness probably had something to do with this. This was a guy who could have been a brilliant concert pianist playing the Western classical repertoire. Uh, this is a guy who made advanced studies of Rachmaninoff and Stravinsky and Khachaturian, and told Miles about these things and brought those harmonies and brought that new kind of music construction into this enterprise of the recording of Kind of Blue. And when uh, you just listen to the opening chords of the greatest song on the emblematic song of Kind of Blue, So
Yep.
What? And those first very quiet chords, mysterious chords, with Paul Chambers and Bill Evans playing these. They were called fourths. If you look on the piano, it's a white key and then two more white keys and then the other white key. That's a fourth. Two keys in between the first key and the second key. It's a mysterious key. It's not exactly minor. It's not exactly major. It's unresolved. It's enigmatic, and that's what they're playing at the outset of So What. And then suddenly Paul Chambers begins on the bass, begins playing those opening notes to So What. And I got to tell you, I'm telling you right now, every time the hairs on the back of my neck go up,
I
every
agree.
time, yeah,
I agree. Me too.
it's something else.
Yeah, it's magic. So let me ask you this. You wove together this story brilliantly, but you're the one that was behind this story. What did you learn as a human being about yourself during this process?
I learned to open my ears. I learned to learn, Joe, if that makes any sense. Uh, one of the many terrific musicians I interviewed was the only guy who could have claimed to have been Miles's protege, a trumpeter named Wallace Roney.
Yeah.
Wallace Roney died of COVID 2020, but I got to spend some real time with him. He was a musical genius. He had perfect pitch, which was discovered when he was 4 years old. He had an incredible ear, and he talked about how he could listen to a saxophone, a jazz saxophone, and begin by process of elimination to figure out, well, is this who is this? Is it Lou Donaldson? Is it Sonny Stitt? Is it Hank Mobley? Or is it Train? Is it Coltrane? And he would go through all the sort of hallmarks and signposts and characteristics of the sounds he was hearing until he came to the knowledge. Anyway, uh, a big thing that I learned about myself, I've always prided myself on having a fairly good ear for music. So in researching this book, I certainly learned a lot of humility. I certainly learned a lot of awe about these noblemen, essentially. Dizzy Gillespie called them super royalty, the giants of jazz, and he was super royalty himself. Most of them were black men. Most of them had had terrible encounters with white authority. Art Blakey talked about playing a gig down in Georgia when he was a young man, getting pulled over while he was driving his car by a white trooper, and getting beaten so badly on the head that he had to have a metal plate put into his skull. And why was he beaten on the head? He was beaten, he said, for being black, essentially. Miles Davis was beaten up by a New York City cop outside of Birdland when Miles was playing there in August of 1959, the very month that Kind of Blue was released. He was beaten bloody. Why? Because he disobeyed this white cop's orders to move along. So I learned awe about these guys. I learned admiration about their ability to endure. I learned I learned a kind of worship about their musical genius, and I learned to begin to understand who it was I was hearing play on a record or on the radio. How do I know this is Sonny Stitt and not Bird? How do I know it's Sonny Stitt and not Bird? Well, there's a difference. And if you listen hard enough, you begin to understand even though they called Sonny Stitt Little Bird, there are a lot of differences. So I educated my ear, and the more educated my ear became, and I'm only a short way along the spectrum of education still, but the more I learned, the more um, the more delighted, the more impressed, and the more awestruck I was by this great music and the great men and women who made it.
So you've conducted a lot of interviews with legends and luminaries. What would you consider one of your most groundbreaking or professionally moving interviews that may have changed the trajectory of your career?
Yeah. Well, I never expected to, I certainly never expected to interview Miles, but that was a little gold, that was a big gold nugget that I had in my pocket before starting my book, having interviewed Miles in 1989. But when I started this book and began to interview jazz musicians, at the beginning of the process, a gift beyond compare dropped into my lap. I requested an interview with Sonny Rollins, one of the giants of all time, and I got the interview. And there I am talking with Sonny Rollins. And not only am I talking to Sonny Rollins, but Sonny Rollins is when I interviewed him, I think, let's see, it would have been, we're 2024 now, and Sonny is 93. I would guess he was in his late 80s when I interviewed him. Sharp as a tack, perfect hearing, perfect cognition, and complete candor, complete openness, complete honesty, and this beautiful balance. He is a great man in so many ways. This really unbelievable balance in Sonny Rollins's personality between knowing exactly who he is. He is a giant. He understands he's a giant. He has always felt the responsibility of being a giant of jazz, but at the same time, never for 1 second puffing himself up, making himself into something beyond what he really is. He knows that he's not only a giant of jazz, he's a human being. He's flawed. He was a heroin addict, a bad heroin addict. He had to break that habit. He was imprisoned for armed robbery as a young man. He had a lot of baggage, Sonny Rollins, but he also had genius, and I was privileged vastly that he shared that genius with me.
It's funny you say that. That was my moment. I interviewed him in 14, and
Wow.
to this day, I am so blown away by what transpired.
Hmm.
The humility, the groundedness, the
Yeah,
genius, and just the absolute level of humanity that courses through him is
yeah,
something that changed the air around me forever.
yeah,
I've never been the same since. So
yeah.
it's
That's
funny.
well, yeah,
I didn't expect you to say Sonny, but everything you said about him
yeah,
just coursed through everything that I experienced. So you're the man behind this book right here. And when people pick it up, they're going to see your name. And I'm curious to ask you this. Everyone's going to have a perception of you, your
yeah,
family, your friends, your readers, but
yeah,
you're the one in control. What's
yeah.
your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I am I am a fiction writer who developed over long period into a fiction writer and a nonfiction writer. But my training was as a fiction writer. My ear was trained, my eye was trained, my nose was trained, and so what I bring to the nonfiction that I write, and especially to the writing I've done about music. I did a 2 volume biography of Frank Sinatra that a few people seem to like pretty well, and I wrote a biography of Irving Berlin, another great genius of American music, that did pretty well too. When I write about music, this discipline, writing about music, that the comedian Martin Mull compared writing about music to dancing about architecture, right? It's impossible, but I love doing it, and I pride myself that I have some ability to do it. I bring my fiction writers instruments to it, my fiction writers tools, my eye, my ear, and my nose. What I like to think I bring to it, and I realize there are a lot of musicians out there who are going to maybe think about this book before they pick it up, maybe have some preconceptions about the book before they pick it up. who the F is this guy, right? Who the F is this white guy with another white guy with glasses, right? Writing about Miles and Coltrane and Monk and all these great black musicians, and even writing about Bill Evans. Who the F is this guy? He's not a musician himself. He professes to have a fairly good ear. Big deal. Who is he? Well, what I think I bring to the book, besides my pretty good ear and my fairly good ability to do this impossible task of writing about music, is I like to think that I bring joy to this enterprise.
Mhm.
This is, I think in the end, this is a joyous book about my huge pleasure in this music and the people who made it. And if I haven't conveyed joy to you when you read it, then I have failed. But I like to think that anybody who picks up this book and gets into it is going to have a good time, because I had a great time writing it, and because I really wanted to put the joy of this music and the people who made it into the words of the book.
I have had a wonderful time reading this. It has been absolute joy. And I got one last question for you.
Yeah.
Do you think jazz will ever become a popular music again?
I think that everybody loves to say what strange times we live in. I think that a process began in the 1960s and 70s and 80s, and then sort of exploded as the internet grew in the late 90s and early 2000s, of dividing this country that in a couple of world wars had all pulled together and been united as Americans. A process began of dividing us into 1,000 tribes, and we remain 1,000 tribes today. That is a wonder. That is something magnificent. It is also something it's something hugely difficult and often very divisive. And it's culturally difficult and divisive too. I realize I'm not giving necessarily a happy answer to your question. There is such great jazz being made today by so many great musicians, from Jazz Mayo Horn to Esperanza Spalding to Robert Glasper to oh my God, to Brad Meldau, to on and on and on and on. So many great musicians today,
Yeah.
and at the same time, jazz has become a niche music. There's no two ways about it. And so there are a lot of people out there, especially a lot of young people. Uh, I hope to God that they discover jazz, that they're discovering jazz. And I hope in my minuscule way, maybe my book will help a tiny bit, uh, to bring people not only to the past that I talk about in the book, but to jazz in the present. Will it ever become a great music again? A popular music again? It's still a great music. It's popular within its niche, within its tribe, and maybe we can all work together, books like this and great music being made today, to expand the tribe a little bit. That's the
A-
best we can hope for.
Amen. I love that answer. James, this has been an honor and a pleasure. Thank you, sir, for taking time out.
Thank you, Joe. It was a blast.
Absolutely.